Hi, I'm John with the Christian Century, and I'm joined today by Kelley Nikondeha, who recently wrote an article for the magazine. And that article is actually an excerpt from her brand new book, The First Advent in Palestine. So we're going to be talking about the book and the article today. But first, Kelley, please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, good morning. I am an author, obviously, and have written a few previous books, but this one, First Advent in Palestine, is dear to my heart, as I love the region and have many friends in the region and love to travel there. I also am a community development practitioner. So my husband and I do work in Burundi, which is in East Africa, and I am a liberation theologian.
Wow. Well, it sounds like we could just talk all day about all this stuff, but we can just focus on the book. So the article that we just published was from chapter 5 of this book about the hospitality and economy in Bethlehem at the time of the first Advent and today. But tell us more about the book as a whole. What is this book about? What were you trying to do writing this book?
Sure. When I approach Advent, Advent is the celebration or the remembrance that the church has embraced the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. And so traditionally we read the texts that Matthew and Luke have given us about the arrival of God or the birth of Jesus. And I typically am feeling pretty down and out about the world leading into Advent. I felt a bit of what I call an Advent ache. And so I went to the text of scripture to try and recalibrate my sense of what it means when God arrives. And so this is a bit of that journey, that looking at these gospel writers and what they share with us allowed me to see things I had never seen before in these Advent stories. In particular, the reality of tyrants and violence and trauma and politics and economic duress, things that I had missed before. And the place of Palestine, both ancient and modern, kind of allowed me to think about that even more deeply and made some of those explorations more relevant. So it's an exploration of those Advent texts given to us, intersecting with the people, the place, and the politics of Palestine.
Wow. Well, I'm really excited to read the whole book. In the excerpt that I did read that we published, you paint this picture of the nativity scene from Luke's gospel in a way that there's such rich hospitality and welcome being extended to Jesus, it's such a different picture than the one I know that I grew up with learning in Sunday school. You know, there's no room left at the inn. And I'm just curious, why do you think we have gotten such a different sort of bad reading of these texts that have become so popular?
Well, some of that is probably well beyond the scope of my expertise. However, I do think one of the fundamental things is that we have misread the word in, I-N-N, and it has been translated for us in such a way that we think of it, when we see that there's no room in the inn, we're thinking there's no room in the motel or the hotel. There's no room in that little place that is set aside for visitors. But actually that there are other ways and better ways to understand that word that have to do with the space that would be available to accommodate people who visit. And that most likely would be family spaces, family compounds. And I live part of my life in East Africa, where family compounds are still what most people experience. Multiple generations of family living in one large space, close together, and there's always room. When we have people travel in from across the border or from up country, there is always room. It may not be the choicest space, may not be the best bed or a private room, but there is never a time that we turn anybody away, that we can't make it work. And that actually is very similar to what Luke describes about what happened in Bethlehem. And if we understand the text, Kenneth Bailey does a wonderful job explaining this in his book. which I reference. So I think some of it comes down to just a bad translation, and it kind of took off from there. But actually, Bethlehem would have had much welcome for their family members coming into town. They would have made room. And I think for me, that was even reinforced by my own time in Bethlehem. I got to know a modern day innkeeper in Bethlehem, and I've stayed at his inn a few times. And he said, we have gotten a bad rap. There is just no way with our hospitality, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, we don't treat people that way. It doesn't matter. We would have welcomed a woman in duress. We would have welcomed a traveler. That's just not true of who we are now or who we have ever been as a people. And it just solidified, the research I did. So I think it's just bad translation. And I would love to see us get a better sense of the kind of welcome that Mary and Joseph probably found with their family when they arrived.
Yeah, thanks. I loved the parts in this chapter where you described the individual friends that you made in Bethlehem. I also loved this particular quote that I wanted to read and ask you about. You said, a true resistance worthy of the first advent would be a move into durable justice work the rest of the year. You give some examples of durable justice work with food insecurity, affordable housing, indigenous land rights. And I just wondered if you could tell us more about this connection that you see between justice work and Advent, between Luke's emphasis on the economy in his text and our own life in the midst of our own Advent. So I would love to hear more about that.
Sure. I think that there is something really important about understanding that this peace campaign that is being initiated with the arrival of Jesus comes in the midst of the Pax Romana. So Caesar has achieved world peace as far as everybody is concerned. And right in the midst of that, God arrives. And I think he is critiquing that this is, that Jesus's arrival is God's way of critiquing Caesar's peace. Caesar's peace comes with violence and oppression, and that includes economic exploitation. But God's peace is going to look different. And it is going to be a peace that is founded on God's justice. So, I think that's the big picture that we'll see throughout these Advent texts. But I, in particular, think Luke makes so clear that economic duress is something that the Holy Family dealt with right up front. The reason that you have to the only reason that the empire has a census, it isn't like our census today where we're just being counted for representation or as a mechanism of citizenship. The only reason a census would have been called was your taxes are about to go up. We are counting so that we can see how much more we can extract from you. And so Joseph and Mary would have been traveling south, not only her quite pregnant and uncomfortable and precarious, but Joseph would have had that recognition that things are going to get worse. Our taxes are about to go up. And that would have been part of the conversation that would have been happening as he arrived into Bethlehem with his family, and they talked about the family plot. And this is part of the background that Luke wanted us to pick up when he said multiple times, there's a census, we have to register. It's, things are going to get worse for us economically pretty quick. And I think once you see that, you recognize things haven't changed. The indebtedness that a lot of Americans still carry. I know, as I said, in East Africa and other parts of the world, the economy is fragile. And, there's all sorts of challenges. And so I think you can't talk about justice and not think about economic justice. I think Luke wants us to get that sense that, man, if this was happening, to Jesus as he entered the world, we need to be thinking about these things. And so I know a lot of churches do really great campaigns during Advent to maybe support water initiatives overseas, a well in Africa, or maybe support a local food pantry, for Christmas. And I think those are great initiatives for Advent. But if it really, I think, is deeply congruent with the Advent spirit, it has to be more durable than that. I would love to see churches think about maybe during Advent, we support the food bank, but the rest of the year, we look at what is the food situation in our community, and how do we care about that all year long, to write a different story for those neighbors that are suffer with food insecurity, or kids that don't get good lunch, get good meals at home and survive on the lunches provided at school, and the food banks that need more support. Why is that we would, and then we would become the advocates, we would get involved with bringing in better food into our communities and advocating for that in policy. That, I think that's more in keeping with Advent, that we are part of God's, peace campaign and justice movement. And that is not just for one season of the year. It's part of who we become as God's people and God's peacemakers.
Thank you. You have given us a lot to think about. For those of you out there who would like to read more, you can find The First Advent in Palestine pretty much anywhere where you buy books. We will put the link below in the video description to the article in the Century from this book. Kelley, thank you so much for chatting today.